Hi there and welcome. In this video, we're going to go over how you can manage dedicated SQL pools and Spark pools for Synapse Analytics using Azure DevOps and its release pipelines. We are going to use Azure's Resource Manager to deploy these assets because they're not available using the workspace deployment pipelines. In order for us to start working, we need to have a repository where we store the templates. Now, if you don't know how to create a template, the simplest way is to step into an instance. Is to not step into an instance. Well, is to step into an instance, and we're going to start with the SQL pool. You just go create new pool. You give it, I'm going to give this the smallest, you give it a name. Now just for reference, dedicated pools and SQL pools should have the same name throughout all your environments. In other words, if you have if you in your development environment, if you have a dedicated SQL pool called I don't know, Sales Data Warehouse or Sales Data Mart, then that must be the Sales Data Mart that you have in Dev, same name in test, integration, pre-prod, and production. No quibbles, must be the same name, and that's the best standard. The same goes for your Spark pools as well. And the reason for that is because um, the shared names are used for linked services, or the names of the pools will be used for connection strings, linked services, etc., etc. Cool. So let's get started. So let's just give this a name. It's irrelevant what the name is. We're gonna go my SQL pool. Right. We're gonna hit next, and then you can choose. Well, for this, you can obviously fix your collation or change your collation if you want. You don't need tags, and then you go to the review side, and here you go download template for automation. Here you can now download your template, and this will give you both your actual template file and your parameter file. Okay, so once you've downloaded them, you then need to connect to your repository. And what I've done is I have checked out, or I've cloned my repo in out into Visual Studio. And then in Visual Studio, I can then work with my solution. So I've created a folder called Synapse Workspace Assets. In there, I've got a Spark pool folder and a SQL pool folder. Now these are generic templates. There's nothing special about these. These templates are as they are out of the box. Obviously, I've got certain values. So if we go into the parameters for the Spark pools, you can see that you have workspace name, you have the actual pool name, you've got things like auto scale, so you can enable disable those, minimum maximum values for that. You got the different compute family, um, and we've got some order pause values. You can see here that you can manage your Spark version as well. So here you can see that we're running Spark 3.0. And yeah, so this is my generic template. And then the same thing I have for my SQL pool. I have the general OM OM code with the parameters, and the parameters are linked to a parameter file. And here's some basic values. So the skew, obviously keep these as the smallest because I just want to make sure that I have some functional values. Cool. So then I've obviously checked this out into or committed this. Sorry, I've obviously committed this back into my repository. And if we go back to DevOps, you can see that these files or the structure is now available here too. Okay, so the first thing we need to do before we can worry about releasing or deploying this into a production environment or a development environment is to create or commit these artifacts as build artifacts so that we can then use triggers for CICD pipelines later based on these artifacts and then consume them downstream. In order for us to do that, we go to pipelines. So here I've created a pipeline called Synapse CICD ARM asset build. And this is a straightforward pipeline. If we go and we edit this one, so we can see that there is 4 copy tasks. So the first copy task copies and you can see here this is the SQL pool. So I've browsed through the repository into my SQL pool folder. I've then said I want to grab all JSON files. I then push those to or copy them from the repo, and I check them out into this artifacts or build artifacts temp directory or directory with a subfolder Synapse Workspace Assets SQL Pool. Also, I think I've got override set. Yeah, just so I always overwrite the templates. There might be changes coming. So in other words, there might be fixes. For instance, there might be additional configuration that's available. So I might want to update these templates in the future. And I do the same for the Spark pool. So I copy that, and you can see here I copy it into the same staging location, artifact staging directory, and then workspace and Spark pool. So I got them copied in there. Then I have some PowerShell assets. I use the PowerShell assets for things like setting security or adding accounts to the Synapse administrators, making sure that I persist things like security and that sort of thing, right? And then once that's done, I publish that. So the build artifacts directory, I publish that entire thing into an artifact called Synapse ARM drop. Right, so that's the build pipeline. This is also then triggered. What I do is I trigger this on builds for this repository on the main branch. So if I go, I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to go ahead and trigger it because it's chained with a CICD action for releases into dev, and I want to showcase that. So before I go and highlight what this does, already have some assets for the dev. So you can see I've got these 2 small SQL pool. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these 2 because they're not needed. And there we go, delete those. Type in yes and hit delete. Okay, so I'm just gonna delete them out of my my dev environment. And they should be gone fairly quickly. Okay, before we continue, I just want to go through the release pipeline as well. So for the release pipeline, I have right, so I have two release pipelines, one for dev, one for prod. They use exactly the same templates. The only difference is the parameterization. So in my dev pipeline, so my pipeline is a CICD pipeline. My prod pipeline is a manual pipeline. And the reason for that is because we develop and we want the automated releases. We might need a bit of lag in between or control for our production release because there might be breaking changes, etc. So if we go and we edit this release pipeline, it contains a trigger on uh, sorry, a trigger on our artifacts, and you can see this is um, our ARM assets. You can see there, and the, they are enabled, straightforward CICD enablement. So as soon as the build pipeline is completed successfully and it has published the new assets or new artifacts, that will cause this pipeline to trigger. So it will check out these artifacts, and the first thing it does is deploy our workspace assets. So I've got two pools, and we're going to just update these configurations now. So remember in Visual Studio, I'm going to just bring it up quick. So let's work with the Spark pool. So we have some variables that we can manage. So we have pool name, we have SKU, we have location, but which we want to keep to the same as our environment. We have our workspace name, and metadata sync, which we should always have. Let's leave it at that. So if we start, so the pool name, I don't want this to be small pool anymore, so I'm going to change this. So all I go copy, and then we step back here, and we step into our override parameters, and then SQL pool name, and I want this to be, I don't know, sales DW. Okay. Please note that I also here have the workspace name entered, so that I can, I'll make sure I deploy this to the dev environment. Hit OK. And here you can see, sorry, I forgot to mention, there's obviously a whole bunch of settings for this. We can change. This is irrelevant because this just the execution of where the agent's going to execute. The truth is that the template will still deploy in the correct region, but you can override these parameters as well. Same here. So, oh, I can't. Oh, there. Sorry. So yeah, you can override the location for the pool as well. Cool. So now what we do then after that is we do the same, but with the Spark pool. So I want to not have the default name for this one, which is I think small pool. So let's go back to Visual Studio and let's see what that parameter is. So there we go, Spark pool name. So I'm just going to copy that. I'll go back to DevOps, go and add another variable override, Spark pool name, and I want to call this one, I don't know, sales, I don't know. I don't know. Sales Spark pool. I think there's a limitation somewhere. And also, I think it must be, oh, I don't know. I'm just going to call it sales spark pool. Cool. And the same thing here. You can see I've browsed to, um, if you hit browse to the templates here, it will show you your artifacts, and you can then step through and then go to, whichever one you want to use. And hit cancel. And then, and that's pretty much it. So obviously the execution type or the agent type here or the job type is an ARM template deployment. Cool. Once you've done that, you can hit save. If we step back, so just want to go back to the pipeline. So then after that, I've got my I've got a bit of a struggle with stringent security or access rights in my organization. That's prohibiting me from using a certain type of service account. So I'm trying to figure out a workspace or workaround to this. So I have um, basically this is setting. I've got a script, a PowerShell script, and I can show that in Visual Studio as well. And I'll link all of this, all of the JSON scripts on that. I'll link them all and the YAML code in a Git repo in the description of this video, so you can go and download them. So if we look at the set permission PowerShell script that I created, so there's a quite straightforward one. I can take that one out. That one's relevant. I'm going to use this as my build trigger. So I read in some parameters. I make sure that I have the Synapse Azure Synapse PowerShell modules installed. I then use the new Azure Synapse role assignments. And I'll do this with a try catch, just because I don't want to have errors, irrespective. I can catch the errors later when I'm debugging. I output them anyway to the logs or to the console, so you can see them when you do your deployment review if things go wrong. So I choose not to have error handling, or I choose this way of error handling because it's easier for me to understand and I can catch it elsewhere and write routines for that. So anyway, so this is quite straightforward. I pass in the workspace name variable, the role name, and the sign-in name in SPN format or SPI or I can't remember what the abbreviation is, which is basically an email address or the service principal name if it exists. It can't be this variable cannot be a GUID or an object ID. It has to be a name. Right. So once that's done, that then obviously my pipeline is completed, and I should have a functional workspace assets. Cool. So if we go now, I'm going to go and commit the change that I just made in the PowerShell script here in Visual Studio. So we go to our Git changes, and you can see that the PowerShell script is modified. Just remove the one line, and we're just going to go here, final test commit. Right. Yes, I'm going to save that. So that's now committed, and I go and I push this to a main branch. So now what's going to happen is that this build pipeline is going to kick off. So we go back to our pipelines, and we should see that we have, not yet. We're a bit too quick. If we refresh the screen, there you go. So you can see our build pipelines running, and all this is doing is just creating the artifacts. Oops, pushed the wrong link. There we go. So if we click into this guy, you can see that it's busy. Collect ARM assets. Start. You can see it's busy running. Wada. and it should be done. There you go. We have produced one artifact. Make a step through and have a look at that artifact. So here's our latest artifact. Here you can see there's a PowerShell script, etc., etc. And if we click into the PowerShell script, that should be now missing the. So let's see if that opens. Oh, it wants to download it, which we're not going to do. I'm not going to open them up. But anyway, so that's done, and you can see that there's the other folders. Now, if we go and look at our release pipelines, we should now have triggered release pipelines as well. You can see here, if we click into release 11, so this one's now running. So you see that our first task is queued. Now it's in progress, waiting for the agent to start up. There you go, agent's running. And you can see that it's busy checking stuff out and doing its thing, right? And now it's going to run the ARM code. So first it deploys that SQL pool. So now we should obviously none of the stuff. So if we go back here, sorry, my bad. Here you can see we don't have any pool. We got this other SQL pool that we have, but we don't have that sales data warehouse, and we don't have the sales Spark pool. Right. Let's. This takes a while to run. Obviously, because it's actually deploying the assets using the Azure Resource Manager. So that should be ticking along. And come on. Okay. Whilst this is busy running, let's have a quick chat around um, why we're doing this. So the idea around this is to have a standard controlled way of deploying so that we don't get multiple versions of the truth, so to speak, right? In other words, if you as a an Azure infrastructure analyst or uh, engineer gets a request to create an additional Synapse pool or SQL pool, you obviously don't want to log into the workspace and do all of that stuff. All you want to do is just go into your releases and find your ARM asset release, modify that, and then go into your workspace assets, clone out. So let's say we need an additional pool. So all we can do here is just go say, I want to clone this task. And we have now the task cloned. Is this the copy? Yeah. So call this, I don't know, I don't know, marketing DW. Just gonna go ahead and copy that, and then in our parameters, instead of sales DW, we just update that to marketing DW. Hit save. Added marketing DW. Hit OK, and you're done. I'm not going to save because I don't want to cause any problems, but um, that's how simple it is. If you need to modify now, the deployment method here incremental, so they will You know, you have the ability to change SKUs. So if you change the parameter to different SKU, it's effectively going to scale your data warehouse. There might be things that will become destructive for your actual data. So I would advise against, well, I would test it all first. And hence why we have, we have, we work with development environments and production environments. So if we make mistakes, we can fix them. Let's go back to to the actual pipelines. I'm going to go and discard those changes. So I just want to see if this one's done. So it looks like it deployed the workspace assets, and you can see it's busy running PowerShell scripts. And there we go, done. Oh, oops. Did I hit redeploy? I want to hit cancel. But yeah, so you can see it ran through, no problem. Took 2 minutes and 52 seconds to deploy the SQL pool, and then 32 seconds to deploy the Spark pool. So if we go back here and hit refresh, we should now have our sales DW and our sales Spark pool. So let's see here, sales DW in dev, there it is, and our sales Spark pool. So now we would do we, well, our data analysts and our data engineers would now go ahead and do development or deploy. We would have a release pipeline, obviously, to deploy our DDL for these. And obviously, our developers can now also step uh, into the dev workspace, and they can now create notebooks. There again, you can see they're sitting in our dev environment. Sorry, just hold on. So in our dev workspace, we can just now go and start working with our data warehouse databases. Sorry, my machine is a little bit slow today. Let's just step through here. So if I go and I add new Spark or new notebook, I should be able to connect that notebook to my sales, what was it? Sales Spark pool. So if we, there you go, sales Spark pool. Right, there we go. All is well. Let's see if we can, there we go, databases, there you go. So we have our old Spark pool, and there's our new, our old data warehouse, and here's our new data warehouse. All is well, and as it should be. Cool. For the obviously for the production release, so once all the artifacts have been developed and we're happy that everything is good, we can then go to our release and go to our prod release and go say create new release, release the workspaces, and create. Now, obviously, any the YAML code needs to be managed in these releases as well. But we'll get to how to synchronize these in another episode. Or you well, I, to be fair, I actually wouldn't release it this way. I would probably have stage release with validation. So once uh, the release of the dev environment has been tested or validated, you would tick a box and in the same release pipeline run the same code or same tasks, but against production parameters. Cool. I trust that this was useful. In the description of video, I will link in um, the repository that will carry the YAML code and the PowerShell scripts, etc. And yeah, hopefully you've learned something and gained some experience. Thanks for this. Bye.